Hey, everybody, welcome back to You Are Free TV. It is Monday, July 8th, 2024. I'm so thrilled to be back with you again. I hope you had a wonderful celebration of Independence Day and the weekend. And today we have a great surprise. We have Leo Zagami back with us. We're going to be continuing to discuss his Confessions of an Illuminati, Volume 10. This is the Islamic Freemasonry and the secret societies behind the eternal conflict in the Middle East. And as we have, of course, now just a couple days ago, now we have the new Iranian president coming in, a reform president, with the death of the recent president who died in the helicopter right back in the mid-May. We're going to be talking about the ancient, the secret societies and Islamic Freemasonry, how it ties in with Freemasonry controlling a lot of the events going on today to do with the secret societies, and how this is bringing in the one world government. It's also connection to the Zionist Israel situation, all of it. But we're going to put a lot of backstory in there, plus talk about the lead up to where we are now. So I'll bring Leo in, and he will tell us what's up. Hi, Leo. Welcome back to the show. LeoZagami.com.
Thank you for having me on. And yes, we will have a rich discussion today based also on the latest current events, which definitely we can dwell in. So then we can even go further into the past history, maybe of some of these places or figures that we will be discussing today.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Also
Leo.
connected, of course, to my latest book, because as we were talking about just before we went on the air, there is definitely a lot to say in regards also to the latest election of this so-called reformist president, Masoud Pezeshkian.
Yes. And a teaser for everyone that so much of this, there's this massive Iranian Masonic societies that are going on, and I'm hoping you're going to talk about that. Also, the presence in the United States and LA, and a lot of the Reform Iran movement coming out of LA, and that whole thing. And I've realized I just skipped over your incredible biography, but people may have seen the last video and they know you a lot on everywhere. But Leo Zagami is this is the 10th volume of Confessions of an Illuminati. He also wrote the last Pope Francis, the Last Pope, in 2019, as well as incredible amounts of film projects, all kinds of things across the board. And he's an incredible scholar. This book, I guess, has been 30 years in the research making. And it's so important that we have you out there. And I'm so glad now that you're living in the United States and a naturalized citizen here. And maybe at some point in this interview might talk about your son, if you feel like mentioning that in the context of everything. So, Leo, welcome to the show.
Actually, I just renounced to my Italian citizenship in the month of June, so to formally be only an American, because I don't believe in dual citizenship. And on top of that, for those who might say, why are you giving up the citizenship of your birth? Well, that was a country which I had to flee in 2019 due to political and religious persecution. So I think that gives it all. I mean, you don't want to stay a citizen of a country who has persecuted you in any way, shape, or form. So they were actually about to condemn me, and they condemned me after I left Italy in June 2019, and they will have taken from me my passport and made me a prisoner of my own country if I didn't flee in May 2019 for America. So I never looked back, and I'm a very proud American citizen now. And this is my first book as an American citizen that has been, like you said, just recently naturalized in the month of March 2024.
Fantastic. We're so glad we get to have you here in the United States of America, especially after Independence Day here. So your first Independence Day
as an American, yes.
Fantastic.
It was definitely a special moment for me because you appreciate even more. Of course, I went through a few Independence Day. My first one was when I was only 12 years old, and was my first visit to the United States of America, and I could assist to this wonderful spectacle of fireworks and so on. But in the last few years, every time this 4th of July came around, of course, I enjoyed it with all my American friends and my wife, who is American, but I could never fully enjoy it as an American because I wasn't yet an American. So it's very important for me. This last 4th of July was very important and very symbolic.
Awesome. That's wonderful. So let's jump in here. So I thought, we touched in the last video, and for people who haven't seen it, I will link it below. We got more really deep into the ancient beginnings of Islamic Freemasonry and secret societies. And in a future video, I hope we can dig in more to those details. To give people just, a short few minutes of what we're talking about when you say, and what is the subject of your book, Ancient Islamic Freemasonry, in case they haven't seen the last video, just a quick synopsis of that, what that is. And then we're kind of zoom forward here so we can also cover current events, and we'll kind of dip back and forth. I'd like to talk about the fake use of the creation of the elders of the Protocols of Zion, and this whole situation to bring in this one world government, but also the World War III scenario that we're looking at as this nuclear conflict. And I believe that the guy who is now the new president, Masoud Pezeshkian, he's bringing in as foreign minister who was the nuclear negotiator. So it's all very pertinent. It's all very prescient. And so why don't you start with a little bit of telling people what you mean about the past, and then we'll move forward.
Well, I mean, in regards to this present election that came after the sudden death of their president, let's not forget that Iran is a clerical system. It's the Islamic Republic of Iran. So there is actually a supreme Ayatollah figure that controls everything. And so, yes, there has been the election, of course, of a new leader, but is still subject to this clerical system. I mean, Masoud Pezeshkian is the classical example of a typical leftist Islamocommunist. What does that mean? Between the 60s and the 70s, Iran indulged more and more in their progressive universities in a very intense mix of two ideologies. On one side, just like every other university in the world, in 1968, we had, of course, the Red Book of Mao. We had this great love for communism that most of the professors started to have from that moment onwards. Basically, all the university system in the Western world, as well as in many other countries around the world, started to be filled up with this perverse left-wing ideology that ultimately here in America created what we currently call the woke ideology. But in Iran, they had to also mix it together with their religious ideology. So that's why I'm talking about Islamocommunism. And it's a very unique mix that we find in Iran, which from January 1979 abandoned their past. However, they didn't really abandon it completely. And if people think that this Masoud Pezeshkian, because he is a 69-year-old progressive reformist, can change something for Iran and Iranians and the Iranian parliament, well, they are eluding themselves because the system that we have in Iran doesn't permit any changes whatsoever. And this change was made mostly to absorb the internal dissent that we had in the last couple, growing dissent that we had in the last couple of years in Iran. There has been a lot of scandals in regards to, of course, the treatment of women, in particular by the hardliner Ebrahim Raisi, who died in the helicopter crash in the month of May, and this led to a lot of protest that, of course, meant a lot of difficult decision for the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who is the supreme leader of the institutions and the Revolutionary Guard. But Iran, to answer to your question, has a very old Masonic tradition, just like other places in the Middle East. In the last 3 centuries, after the official birth of speculative Freemasonry in 1717, which led to the structural organization of various lodges under one body, known as Grand Lodge, or also later Grand Orient in the case of French Freemasonry, French-inspired Freemasonry. Well, these forms of Freemasonry, because they were very popular in both Great Britain and in France, and these 2 countries were very much involved with the colonial, with their colonial empires that they were creating worldwide, especially in Northern Africa. We had a lot of French colonies, Algeria, Morocco. These are all countries that in one way or another were under some kind of colonial rule. And of course, we had also England. And these countries, both the Masons from England and from France, worked to mine the interest of the Turkish Ottoman Empire until the Turkish Ottoman Empire imploded. But when Freemasonry, speculative Freemasonry from the West, either from France or from England, arrived in countries like Egypt, Algeria, or whatever, even outside of the Middle East, even Turkey and so on, they tended to merge with the local pre-existing mystery schools and secret societies, or create at least some kind of alliance. It was actually a way for the colonial powers to integrate them, to arrive to the control of that country, or internally manipulate maybe some kind of protest or revolution, just like in more recent times, we had the Arab Spring revolutions, which were, of course, a farce conducted on the internet by the NSA, CIA, and so on to manipulate. This was, at that time, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have the social networks. We had Freemasonry. Freemasonry was a great social network that led people of different social extraction. You could have the doctor, you could have the butcher, you could have the master craftsman of sorts. Let's remember, we call it speculative Freemasonry because Masonry, of course, before being speculative, was operative. It was actually a craft that led to the construction of churches, and those who constructed these churches in the ancient times needed to have some hidden knowledge that was given to them, so they could build these churches facing the east, and they could all be maybe sending some veiled message, though not apparent to the non-initiated. We see that in all the Gothic churches, in all the churches of medieval times in general. We see that over and over again, these subliminal messages that the people who built these churches in some way contained in these buildings. However, in the Middle East, things were different. We didn't have Christianity. We have Islam. But Islam itself had already merged with a number of secret societies during their expansion. And actually, like I explained in Confessions of an Illuminati, Volume 10, secret societies, as we know today in the Western world, come from the Middle East. So we are always in debt to the Middle East for this invention. it might not be reputed as a positive invention, the fact that the secret societies exist, but they exist because they were inspired definitely by the Middle East, by the fact that we had ancient cultures there that for thousands of years predated Christianity, like in Egypt, like in Sumeria. Just to give you an example, in Algeria, for example, the father of modern Algeria, Emir Abdel Kader, which is also called by the Algerians a saint amongst the princes, or a princess among the saints. This guy, who was also a Sufi, Abdullah Qadir Muhil al-Din, that was his main name before he was known as Emir Abdel Kader, was initiated. But today, if you talk to the Muslims in Algeria, they will not accept that. Instead, there is ample evidence. There is even an image, a painting of this guy hanging in the headquarters of the Grand Orient of France. Mm-hmm. And he's the guy who led to the independence of Algeria. So this independence, as you can see, was already crafted and manipulated from the very start, from the people who actually were in charge before it became independent. Because once these countries became independent, they never really ceased to have a special relationship with their country, the country who originally made them a colony. So that's why we have his image hanging in the headquarters in Paris of the Grand Orient of France. And he was initiated in Cairo. And in Cairo, we have really the headquarters of the most influential initiates in the Middle East. When, after the Second World War, Iran wanted to start with the second and last Shah of the Pahlavi dynasty, a new era, after Nazi fascism was defeated, they wanted to kickstart again a new era of Masonry in Iran. And in the 1950s, as we know, we also had that coup d'etat in Iran, aided by the CIA. Well, when they actually started to work on reestablishing Freemasonry, the first lodge that was open in Iran was actually an irregular lodge connected to that Cairo Lodge, which has a very long history that even predates Islam, because it goes back to the ancient mystery schools of the Illuminati in Alexandria of Egypt, in Memphis. So all that happened when I'm talking about Islamic Freemasonry, yes, we have formally the birth of Islamic Freemasonry, speculative Freemasonry in the last 3 centuries, even at the time of the Ottoman Empire, very active within the Ottoman Empire, as well as in all the various countries that, like I said, were connected either to France or Great Britain. But the thing is that ultimately, some secret societies that merge with this Islamic Freemasonry were pre-existing and actually carried on their own form of Masonry for over 1,000 years, like the infamous Cairo Lodge that was established during the Fatimid dynasty. And this is really the mother lodge of the Middle East. Today, Freemasonry is actually illegal in Egypt, but it's still practiced in secret, as I witnessed myself personally when I went there. There were still Freemasons that had put together, and then later on put again together, a Masonic High Council for Egypt, connected to the regular Lodge of England, which I had been one of the co-founders. So I know a little bit about how Freemasonry operates in the Middle East, where it's only accepted officially and regularly in countries like Lebanon. Lebanon is probably the only country where Freemasonry is practiced regularly, meaning you have no problem in opening up your Masonic lodge and of course is accepted by the authorities. Like I said, in Egypt, that's not possible today. However, there is still in Egypt a core group of people which are considered like the elders of the situation, and they are always they're always watched with envy by the rest of the Middle East. That's why they have always a particular role. That's why when the CIA, Shin Bet, or Mossad have to discuss anything relevant, they always go to Cairo. Cairo is still a very important place for the Illuminati. It was in ancient times. I mean, that's why I'm kind of surprised that I was the first one to publish a book like this, because I mean, a lot of people have been talking for a long time about the Illuminati, Freemasonry, and all that, but without really viewing where all this comes from, and also how important the influence of Freemasonry has been in the Islamic culture. That is something that Muslims tend to deny because it goes against their religion. And
well, I mean, perhaps
narrative, you know, the narrative of always blaming Israel or blaming the West, because in reality they should blame also themselves. Because when you see the list of Freemasons which I include here, including Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani, for example, Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani was an Iranian, organized and attempted, actually organized the murder that happened of a Shah. I mean, he was a guy who was backed by Great Britain, but then British Freemasonry at one point told them, listen, your operation needs to go under another banner in regards to Freemasonry, because we don't accept the discussion of religion and politics in our lodges. And he then asked the help of the Grand Orient of France, which was much more open towards the discussion of religion and politics. And then he established a very successful obedience for about a decade in Egypt before he was kicked out of Egypt. He ended up having to leave Egypt because, but this guy, Jamal ad-Din al-Afghani, his name al-Afghani usually is interpreted as him being a Sunni, him being an Afghani guy, and his look with a turban looking like a Taliban is typical, no? But in reality, he's a Persian, and a Persian who was trying to pass as a Sunni, but in reality was born in a Shiite context. And when I talk Shia, I talk about a completely different branch of Islam that, as you know, has also much more spiritual and esoteric content. Because when it expanded and arrived in place like contemporary Iran, which was Persia, it embraced previous religions like Zoroastrianism, that was very much a favorite of Adam Weishaupt of the Illuminati, Manichaeism, Gnosticism in various. So there was all these other, and they didn't just disappear, they simply were absorbed by their Illuminati and made a little bit more discreet, so then the masses will not criticize them. But in reality, Iran has a very vast esoteric tradition, and when 3 centuries ago they started to develop speculative Freemasonry from 1717 onwards in Great Britain, there was a few Iranian princes who went to London to get initiated, and then went back in Iran and established the first lodges of Freemasonry, and also the Illuminati were established in Iran. Iran gave a lot of importance to Freemasonry until the first Shah of the Pahlavi dynasty, who wasn't really very favorable to Freemasonry because he was watching what Hitler and Mussolini were doing against Freemasonry, and so he thought that they should have an anti-Masonic stand. But like I said just a moment ago, in the 1950s, this changed with a new lodge that backed also the coup that they attempted. There was basically a new lodge that protected the Shah from any problems and the attempted coup. And then from that moment onwards, we see in Iran the rising of a series of lodges from also regular jurisdictions from abroad, who were opening their own lodges, both under the Grand Orient of France or under the Grand Lodge of England, the Grand Lodge of Scotland. So there was definitely a lot of Masonic presence. In fact, like I explain in my book, the 1953 Iranian coup d'etat, known in Iran as the 28 Mordad coup d'etat, it was instigated by the United States and by Great Britain, but without the help of Freemasonry, they couldn't have, because they elected a prime minister. They strengthened, though, the monarchic rule of the Shah. It wasn't a coup. It wasn't like what happened in 1979, which instead brought Freemasonry to have to take a different position, and eventually they helped the Shah bringing out the gold of their country. And I explain how this happened in my book. I explain how the Italian, the Sicilian mafia in America and in Sicily aided the Shah by sending a group of mobsters from Sicily into Iran in January 1979 to help sending all this gold out of the country, which eventually will be sent there in the Vatican vaults, in the Vatican Bank. And in Iran, this was never admitted. I mean, Khomeini never admitted that the last Shah, walked out of Iran with all the gold. He said, oh, he just went on a plane and left like a coward and didn't take anything. Instead, in reality, he had took a lot. And
well, it's fascinating. Do you mind if I interject 1 minute? Or sorry, go ahead.
No.
All right, let me just.
Yeah, please.
Okay. I want to hear more about that, because we see that be the thing all the time, right? These coups or these overthrows that really are about stealing all the wealth out of the country, right? And to installing a more controlling, a more dictatorial, more tyrannical, taking away more and more rights, consolidating more and more power in the few is what replaces it. But in the meantime, usually there is a mass, stealing of the wealth that goes along with that. And if you wanted to explain that a little more in this situation, and I know people can go to your book and read about it, but I think it's very key, especially when we come forward, which we're going to do in about 5 minutes. We're going to come up here into the, a little further into the future, but, even look at the billions, we've got, and I want to hear your stance on Barack Obama in relation to this, because also in those, in both in the 50s and in the 70s, we get the Skull and Bones, we get the other secret societies with the CIA in there and the Bonesmen, and in modern days, we get John Kerry, we had George H.W. back in the early days, around when all of this was happening, and John Kerry, the Bonesman now, and then George W., the stupid one, still a Bonesman. And of course, Dulles, all of them in the CIA, and the carrying out of these coups, not just here, but the 70 other ones, the stealing of the wealth, the consolidation of power, the creating of tyranny, right? In this instance, Shiism and what happens then to the total tyrannical government that comes in from Iran, which before then was this incredible, intellectual place. Everybody was dressing to the nines. They had lovely culture, beautiful infrastructure, everything, and then it comes to what you're talking about now. So I'll let you continue. Sorry about that.
No. I mean, absolutely, that's a good thing you specified. And then I would like to specify also, though, that the establishment of the Pahlavi Iranian royal dynasty that ruled only 54 years in the end. I mean, there were two Shahs out of this dynasty. The first was a soldier, and then the second one, of course, was his son. and they ruled between 1925 and 1979. And in this period, the Freemasonry underwent three distinct phases that I explain in my book. There was the dormant phase. Now, what does the dormant phase mean? It's a little bit like today in Egypt, because in Egypt today Freemasonry is officially banned, so they are officially in the dormant phase, which means a limited amount of Masonic activities takes place during a dormant phase. Officially, actually, none takes place, because a Freemason says he goes to sleep when he's not active. So we call it the dormant phase. Now, from 1925 to 1950, under Esa Shah Pahlavi, the founder of the Pahlavi dynasty, we had this dormant phase. Then we had the decade following his abdication. The dormant phase of Freemasonry continued, but the moment in which you had the abdication, the forced abdication by the Allied forces in 1941, this was seen as an opportunity for change. And given the anti-Masonic sentiments of the rising communist and national forces, the masters of the lodge, the first lodge, which re-established Freemasonry in Iran, several were, there was prime minister, leading politicians. So, I mean, there was important people. They resumed the Masonic activities, first of all, amongst the elite, the political elite of the time. The revival of Freemasonry then happened with the creation of the lodge, what was called actually the Lodge Pahlavi. It was established in November 1951 when Mohammed Kali Yavaheri, this Mason who was both living in Syria and Lebanon, so countries which also have a strong Masonic connection, especially Lebanon, like I said earlier, and editor of an important newspaper called the Unity of Islam, founded this Lodge Pahlavi with the support of the royal court, of the Pahlavi royal court. And this lodge was affiliated to the Cairo Lodge, this obscure Cairo Lodge. And the Lodge Pahlavi also addressed the Grand Lodge as connected to the Grand Orient. So we know that there was a connection to more Orient. What does it mean, Grand Orient? It means you are following a more progressive leaning form of Freemasonry that is connected to the French Grand Orient, usually. The lodge was renamed Lodge Ornayun, and it actually stayed active until the middle of the 50s. So it was had a significant political power, especially in the post-1953 coup d'etat. And I talk about also the differences of these forms of Freemasonry in my book. And of course, I explain how the Lodge Pahlavi was not affiliated with the British craft, but had a connection with the Grand Orient and with, of course, this Cairo Lodge. And then you had a different period in Iran, the period of modernization, of what you described a little bit with the intellectual movements and everything else. That was a bit reflecting what was going on in the Western world. This is the moment of major expansion of Freemasonry in Iran between 1955 to 1978. You had dozens of regular lodges affiliated with French, German, Scottish Grand Lodges that were chartered in this country. And viewed with increasing suspicion, though, Freemasonry was banned in Iran altogether, of course, after the 1979 revolution, especially because, like I said, they also helped the Shah bringing out this gold. And, of course, establishing then themselves here in America, thanks to the support of local Grand Lodges here, American Grand Lodges, they established the Grand Lodge of Iran in Exile. Today, they have a number of lodges inside and outside the United States. Their headquarters is here in California, in Santa Monica, on the Santa Monica Boulevard, right at in the center of it. So they exist. They exist outside of Iran. Of course, their status is in exile. They don't have seemingly a direct relationship with Iran because Iran forbids any form of Freemasonry. However, we have seen over and over again how Freemasons are used, though, for diplomatic purposes, secret missions, even by the Vatican itself. Sure. When they had to help the Shah bring out that gold, it was actually the Vatican who then inquired. And then, of course, there were the Freemasons in Iran at the time, loyal to the Pahlavi, that helped out in the whole process. That happened in a very short time. They brought out this gold out of the camp. But then after, there was the revenge of Khomeini. The revenge of Khomeini, and this is another thing that nobody talks about. He employed Mehmed Ali Akcha to go and kill the Pope. He sought Akcha through various means to come to Iran, get trained, and then unleash hell upon the world by killing the Pope. He didn't manage to kill the Pope, as we know, but he injured them. And this whole thing became, of course, a gigantic then conspiracy plot that every journalist in the world talk about, almost always blaming Russia through Bulgaria.
It's always Russia.
It's always Russia. But in reality, we can say that there was probably, yes, some support. We always know that Russia has always been close to the Islamic Republic of Iran, but it was actually Khomeini. I mean, the fact that a guy like Khomeini employed a killer to go and kill a pope, it's scandalous, and still to this day is not discussed by anybody.
Interesting. That's fascinating. And you know, it's interesting because I wish we had time. We probably won't in this video. Hopefully in the next one we could bring more in about the Vatican and then to tie them all together in this, you know, coming Chrislam or whatever this one world religion is that they're trying to scotch tape together with a nuclear war as the impetus. But I just wanted to bring in, we were talking about Islamocommunism and the rise of it, and it seems to come in alongside or just after the creation of Reform Judaism, right? The creation of
Reform, Progressive Judaism, are simply outlets of the Sabbatean Frankist heresy. Yeah. So it's obvious that they have some kind of similarity.
Absolutely. And just to throw one thing, it's very interesting as we see this reform Iranian new president. We also, in the same 2 days, we see, right, UK, the Labour, you know, new prime minister, you know, just trouncing. What did they say with the first attempt at the Iranian election? Oh, hardly anybody came out to vote magically. You know, there was too low of a voter base. Same with UK. Oh, hardly anybody came out, but somehow Labour won everything. And now we see in France, right? So you're talking about the lodges, you know, France, England, Iran.
Yeah, in France,
you know, and now France, they had a huge right majority. It was really
important actually for your interview to specify, as you made this point regarding France. France is a big Masonic player. It's the second biggest Masonic player after England. England, of course, established speculative Freemasonry with the Grand Lodge of England. Later became the United Grand Lodge of England. From 1813, they opened up to non-Christians, and so it became a widespread belief that they could use Freemasonry to unify the religions, the people from various faiths, rather than it was initially the intent was to unify the Christians that have fought against each other in England, leading to the pilgrims coming to this part of the world. Now we had people fleeing for religious belief already with the confrontation among Christians. But then it was about also uniting people of different faiths. Then in the 1870s, there was suddenly this split. The Grand Orient of France wanted to discuss politics and religion in their lodges, wanted to also get atheists in their lodges. So give up the belief in a supreme architect. You are obliged by the Constitution of Anderson of not being a liberal atheist. You cannot be a liberal atheist if you follow the Anderson constitutions that were established to protect Freemasonry by a Reverend Anderson. Instead, in the 1870s, something happens in France. And France is really this great laboratory of progressive, of communism itself. I mean, La Commune of Paris.
And occultism, right? And, the combination of the two.
Well, Eliphas Levi was both a socialist and the guy who invented the word occultist. And on top of that, a supporter of the Sabbatean practice. I mean, it's a kind of all. And we see that one of the rites of Freemasonry that comes out of France, the rite of Memphis and also the rite of Minstrel, are connected to Sabbateans, and they are used, like I said just earlier, regarding sabotaging the Ottoman Empire. These Masonic rites were used to sabotage eventually the Ottoman Empire, which was seen as religious, as overly orthodox, and couldn't open up to modernity. However, we saw what happened after they dismantled the Ottoman Empire. What came next actually brought Islam back a few hundred years. And we see it also with Iran. Iran was a very developed and modern country. Of course, the support by the CIA, by the West, of the Shah, of the Pahlavi dynasty, ultimately led to their defeat. But it was all kind of controlled, this defeat, this manipulation that led to the birth of this figure, the Ayatollah Khomeini, that arrives. And he was for a few months in Paris, out of all places, leading this revolution. So it kind of like people see, how comes this Muslim in Paris? What is he doing? Talking to all the journalists of the world that were there in pilgrimage in the 70s. Put on the TV and you see this Khomeini talks in his garden to this other journalist, describing the beauties of how he's gonna lead this republic under the Sharia, and the Sharia, of course, became something that was re-embraced by a lot of these countries because of the manipulation games that were playing by the West. So we can say that Western Freemasonry, in connection with Islamic Freemasonry, create then the basis with people like Jamaluddin al-Afghani for modern Islam, Salafism, Salafi jihadism, and all the rest. It's like when it comes to the Assassins, which led really the way to the first form of jihadism that was completely disrespectful of all rules of engagement, because you had the Order of Assassins that were the killers, the contract killers of the Knights Templars, against the Seljuk Turks of Saladin, who instead behaved in a much more proper and dignified fashion. You're
saying the Order of the Assassins, right? You have the beautiful Italian accent, but I just want to say it so people with a boring American accent.
We say the Order of Assassins, but in reality, we call it also the Order of the Assassins, because the Ashish element also comes into it. The fact that during their initiation, they smoke copious amount of hashish to then be blindfolded, brought in front of these beautiful ladies and stuff, and be promised the paradise with 72 virgins and all this bullshit. Now, that was the making of the ultimate jihadist. But it was made within Shia Islam. It wasn't within Sunni Islam. So it took several centuries to transpose this vision of Islam. It's completely different to the Sunni world. And it was Freemasonry that eventually led to that, because otherwise Salafi jihadism will never be born. And Salafi jihadism is Sunni.
So that's the point that is so important to emphasize. So behind all of this, we have these multiple orders of Freemasons and other secret societies interconnected in order to create this plan okay, to bring about a Shiite Islam that is radical, to bring about jihad, to bring about caliphate, as well, further caliphates, and as well as the destabilization of the West.
But also they had to find a sponsor for all this. So once, initially they were paying people like Jamaluddin Afghani with the money from the Suez Canal, but when they needed more money and the whole thing with oil came in, the Emirates were, of course, the richest countries when it comes to richest in oil countries in the world. No? So what they did, they transformed those countries in Wahhabis, leading to the birth of Wahhabism, which is basically a different form of Salafism, which doesn't engage in jihadism because they are too elegant. They have all their turbans and stuff, a lot of billions to throw to you, but they're the biggest sponsor of Salafi jihadism because, of course, that is their outlet of hate towards the West to fight the jihad, the ultimate war against the West, and they do it by recruiting desperados in the majority of Muslim countries, which are third world countries, unfortunately, to this day, in a state of poverty. And even Egypt itself still is a very important recruiting ground because, of course, of their central role. Let's not forget, like I said, with the Cairo Lodge and with the fact that Jamaluddin Afghani led to the birth of Salafis from Cairo. So even if the Sunni and the Shia world seem divided, ultimately, when it comes to the jihad, now they are more united than ever. And it seems like that division that the Knights Templar had been played on, the Vatican basically saw in the very early moments of the development of Islam that this religion could be manipulated by simply putting one faction against the other. That was the first policy the Vatican adopted. And with the establishment of the Knights Templars that then used the Assassins against Saladin and the Seljuk Turks that were advancing, this was simply an instrumental way of using and with the creation of more branches from always springing out of the Cairo Lodge, like the Druzes, so it was like a product, the never-ending product of heresies that then create their own fate. Nowadays we have yes,
I mean, it's almost like that cloud and pivot. It's the divide and conquer, ongoing.
Yeah.
I mean, in the United States, a really simple version would be, well, now we're going to come up with BLM. Now we're going to come up with Antifa. Now we're going to come up with all these different groups to throw into the mix to continuously have this fighting going on, right? I'm not saying it's the same, but it's the same thing.
We have the indigenous Muslims, which are a direct product of Freemasonry, which I described in my book, because there was a division here due to segregation of two forms of Freemasonry, one black, Prince of Freemasonry, and the white form of Freemasonry, which also had a number of appendant bodies and organizations, like the Shriners in particular, that then became divided in the black Shriners and the white Shriners. And the black Shriners, on the contrary of the white Shriners, they want to actually believe in Islam not as simply a social tool that at times led to mockery and to the Sons of the Desert fiction, the film, Lauren Hardy. No, they wanted to take this Islam seriously, so seriously that some of them led then the birth of Moorish science, and then, of course, the Nation of Islam, and a lot of the anti-Semitic and all this hate that we have towards the Jews in particular within the black community, well, it generates from there. And it's in Freemasonry that we find also the birth of the Moorish science and Nation of Islam, that if we go and study the roots of this indigenous, because they were born here in America, forms of Islam, and it was the first actually mosque, the one operated in the US by the Moorish side, we see that they were not really born out of the Quran. they were born out of Rosicrucianism and other things that have nothing to do with Islam, but they were kind of all put together. And now we have people like Farrakhan, of course, you know.
Sure.
But it was important for me to address this because people need to understand the variety and how the Illuminati and the Freemasons operated also in the establishment of things like the Nation of Islam.
Absolutely, so important. And you know, if you and I mean, to kind of skip there, but not entirely. When we look at, you know, you brought about how it was the, you know, sort of the false creation of anti-Semitism through the Nation of Islam and everything that went on there. And yet the very real reality is also involved in the division of the classes and all of this, you know, situations that tend to go on with specifically non-religious Reform Jewish culture. And with that in mind, and I was reading in your book how we get to Hamas, you know, for instance, and what's going on here, where you get your, you know, people like, you know, it's Netanyahu, you know, created Hamas. We know that, you know, that
I mean, no,
yeah, that was ridiculous.
They just need to read this book and know that the Muslim Brotherhood was created by the British intelligence support and Freemasonry in 1928. From there, of course, we have all the Salafi jihadists. Is like, you know, you can draw kind of like a tree, no? And then you see that Hamas was born out of this tree because they're a product of the Muslim Brotherhood. However, we also see they have a very close connection to Iran. And so I explain also this close connection to Iran in my book.
Fantastic. And I wanted to just mention that you talked about that when Iran was able to, I believe, reinstate having Masonic lodges in Iran, that they also reprinted a modern version of the Elders of the Protocol of Zion.
Yes.
At the same time. And that, if you could explain here, we only have about 9 minutes left. I know you've got other things.
Yeah.
Just a quick, like a taste. So in our next video, we'll get to this, but the fake creation of that document in order to bring about, you know, this conflict between, you know, everybody, you know, hating on the Jews, whom they believe to be the Jews, who aren't even really, you know, the technical Semites, but the creation of that document, the use of it by Islam, including, you know, the Nation of Islam here in the United States, but also it was a giant propaganda piece, right, to really fuel massive hatred in order to bring about a lot of what happened with World War II, what happened, of course, what's going on now in the world with the consolidation of power through this war with Israel, etc. That's a little squirrely what I said, but anyway, give it whatever you want to say.
No, I mean, I can summarize it. As you said, we don't have much time left, but summarizing it is quite easy because, first of all, the protocols of the Elders of Zion today are usually dismissed by the mainstream media as a forgery. And they are a forgery, but they're not only a forgery. They are the most successful propaganda tool ever created. And it's not really a forgery when we go and study the history of these elders of the protocols of the Elders of Zion. We realize that the information came from a lodge that was driven or controlled by a very important Freemason who had also a leading role in the Damascus affair as a lawyer. I'm talking about Adolphe Crimiot. And Adolphe Crimiot was also later on sovereign commander of the French Scottish Rite, the ancient accepted Scottish Rite, led the convent of Lausanne, which is also deemed as a very important moment for the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. Now, just to summarize this whole thing, the protocols eventually will be published for the first time, as we know, in Russia. In Russia, sadly, the family of the Tsar embraced this book. They didn't realize that they were led astray themselves by the people that soon will take the power, which were the Bolsheviks, which included a lot of Sabbatean Frankists, of heretical Jews So here we have, of course, everybody blaming commonly the Jews, the Zionists, without really knowing that the Zionists themselves were hijacked immediately after the establishment of the Zionist movement by Theodor Herzl by the labor Zionists that took over immediately control of this important movement and led after to the formation of the State of Israel. However, the State of Israel today has all the rights to exist because the way the Jews were pushed out of Russia with pogroms, out of Europe with persecution that ultimately led to the Holocaust. I mean, they had no place to go, and they were forced into going by the Sabbatean Frankists like the Rothschild to what became the State of Israel. And so what is their fault now? I mean, where should they go? To another planet? I mean...
Well, it's the self-fulfilling prophecy end of it. It's how you've been talking about. So many of these were controlled events, right? And so,
by what we know as called British Israelism, because British Israelism was not believing in persecuting the Jews, but simply sending them back to their natural home so they could also fulfill somehow the prophecy of the end times. So it's like they were instrumentally used, and nowadays we have a State of Israel, which of course has a lot of elements that I discussed, that I dislike, because they are born out of the labor element in Zionism. Even the kibbutz are a socialist experiment. If we go and see how they are, established and how people live, it's communism. I mean, I am allergic to communism, just so you know. Anything red, I'm red because in Europe we consider red. Now here we consider red the Republic, and that is also a way for the elite to create confusion. Call it red, but socialism and communism are destroying Europe, and they will continue to destroy Europe. They are destroying, of course, Israel, because nowadays in Israel, everybody blames Netanyahu. And Netanyahu, with the conservative forces, are a product of British Israelism, while the critics are a product of labor Zionism, and they're all moving war against each other, criticizing each other in like that divide et impera. But the protocols were published for the first time in the Middle East in 1925 by a Maronite priest, Christian Maronite. And then later on, they also became very popular in other places, like you said yourself, also Iran. Iran nowadays, of course, is all these places, Syria. They dedicate TV shows to the protocols of the Elders of Zion, so they have even reenactments of the whole thing. This is a plot. They say from an old, these Elders of Zion. In reality, you should simply substitute protocols of the Elders of Zion with protocols of the Sabbateans of Zion, and that's it, and you get the whole thing. So
100%. Yeah, you can, I would say replace it with the elders of Cartel Babylon, or whatever you want to call it. That, it is.
To be more precise, I would say Sabbateans, because they are the heretic ones that led to the publication of the protocols in the first place. And I demonstrate in my book how in the last chapter. And so I think it's more appropriate. Of course, then, if we want to study the beliefs of the Sabbateans, they are heretic and Babylonian in nature, and they were. What was Sabbatai Zevi doing in the end? He was converting to Islam in 1666. Let's not forget that. That's very, very important outward, creating then a crypto-Jewish movement still in existence to this day called the Dome. And that led also to the establishment in Saloniki of a very important lodge that then led to the establishment of the Young Turks, that was the leading movement in the end of the Ottoman Empire and the establishment of this new Turkey. Today we have these Young Turks here with even a TV channel in America. These idiots, these communists, these socialists, they are a Masonic product.
Absolutely. And it's all a Masonic project is what your book is about. And I think that's what I was trying to say, that it's you know, it's all a Masonic project. You can find it here in Confessions of an Illuminati, Volume 10. And I will link it below. You can get it wherever books are sold. An incredible book. I've just been so enjoying it. And there's so many questions I wanted to ask, but you speak so well. I wanted to let you go. Hopefully we
No
can
worries. No, I mean, we can have other shows in the future.
Absolutely, absolutely.
To discuss yet more subjects from this book and also other books I wrote. But it was important for me to explain that nowadays the Illuminati, the ones that control these religions, they know exactly what they are doing with these religions. Let's not forget that within the Cairo Lodge, they only worshipped reason and science, and they and even Jamaluddin al-Afghani said the religion is just a tool to manipulate and oppress these people, these ignorant people. So for him, Islam, and he's seen as a great reformist, he's actually a guy who was simply using the religion, and they're using this religion still to keep in a constant state of poverty all these countries. Now, I'm not criticizing the religion per se. The revelation of a prophet and his relationship with God is another thing. But the moment in which then is codified and is put into an institution, either the Vatican or either the Imam of Al-Azhar and his institution or any other institution, religious institution, it seems that is always infiltrated then by these people that then use this religion to keep on establishing their plan, which is ultimately a one-world religion, a one-world government, and enslaving the majority of mankind that believes in their lies.
Absolutely.
But of course, yes. We go then and hear instead the prophets of these religions, how they spoke at the beginning. Jesus itself discussed what will happen with the mark of the beast, but even Muhammad discussed the end times, as well as other religions discuss what will happen in this crucial moment of history. I mean, these are, let's say that organized religion today is in the hands of false prophets, just like Pope Francis. People who speak about the children of light or of darkness, they get excommunicated like Vigano, because they are deemed dangerous and they can't, there is no real religious leaders today. There is only there is basically political leaders borrowed to religion, because Pope Francis is a communist political leader. That's it. He's a progressive, socialist, communist, religious leader. And if you criticize him, you get kicked out of his church, or so that's what's happening here. The Latin Mass became so controversial that the FBI had to investigate these guys who stand there with the, come on, guys. I mean, it's completely, and they don't go and investigate the mosques of the extremists here in America, which are welcoming from the northern or the southern border a bunch of terrorists in the last few months. Well, I mean, I think the FBI has the wrong priorities.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that's a wonderful place to leave it, because we're at over an hour, and I know that you wanted to have this be an hour. Leo, thank you so much. I so enjoy these talks, and I hope that you out there have really enjoyed this as well. I want to thank you so much. People, again, you're going to go to wherever you buy your books and get Confessions of an Illuminati, Volume 10, the Islamic Freemasonry and the Secret Societies Behind the Eternal Conflict in the Middle East. Wow. And it's amazing. I've been just so, like, I can't even get my head out of it. I'm so enjoying it. So, Leo, you're wonderful at what you do. Thank you so much. I really look forward to next time. And I'll see you
very
then,
much.
Okay?
Send me the link of this video so I can also spread it on my own social networks. And Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me on. And of course, we will talk soon. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. God bless. Wow. What an incredible interview. Leo Zagami, he's an incredible mind with so much information. And I hope that you will go and buy his book, Confessions of Illuminati. We need this kind of backstory to understand what's happening here in the world with the creation of the fake, false second coming scenario, the self-fulfilling prophecy of the great work of ages, of all these secret societies and the Masonic interconnections of all of them with the occult satanic center that goes out like a spider web throughout all of these to plan these massive, huge events over long periods of time that we're living through right now in a very, very intense period. I couldn't get into everything. I hope to with Leo to kind of, wrestle it into a cohesive picture of right now with what's going on with Iran, the US, Obama, the Biden replacement, the Israel situation, UK, Labour, France just going now full left when they were so ahead with Le Pen's party just a few days ago. The steals going on all over for entertainment purposes only. And of course, the new reform leader of Iran. All of this is while we have the great replacement of Biden going on. So these are all interconnected. Barack Obama, Muslim Brotherhood, Iran, the new president of Iran, Pezeshkian, I'm sure I'm not saying it right. He wants to go back on the JCPOA. So I'm sure he's been talking to Kerry for entertainment purposes only, the Bonesman who keeps running back and forth to Iran with not being registered as a foreign agent. All of this going on, the billions in cash to the Iranians, et cetera, all the technology stolen and given. So there's so much to say and talk about. Thanks so much for watching. We're going to continue these interviews with Leo. And I'm hoping I'm going to be able to give captions on this video. So I'm saying this at the end. So it either happened or it didn't. So you can read it if you're having trouble understanding Leo's wonderful accent. So we'll talk again. If you enjoyed this video and you want to support the channel, I would so appreciate you doing so I can bring you more interviews like this. I want to do a lot more interviews going forward and kind of expand that part of the channel, as well as do deep dives that I need time to be paid for me to do the studying required to do my deep dive political dives and analyses. So if you can support the channel, there's ways to do so below. I thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. You are free.